December 4th, 1950, Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. A Corsair fighter jet slices through the frozen wind, chased by fire and enemy gunfire. The mountains below are white with snow and red with war. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Jesse L. Brown, the U.S. Navy's first black pilot, fighting to keep his crippled plane alive. His fuel's gone, his landing gear won't respond, and the radio bursts with panic, but his voice, calm. "Tell Daisy I love her." Seconds later, the jet disappears into the ice. The world would remember the crash, but forget the war he'd been fighting long before that day, because Jesse L. Brown wasn't just shot down in Korea, he was shot down by his own country long before he ever took flight. America, 1940s. The world was at war, but the battle lines weren't just drawn in Europe or the Pacific. Inside the United States, a quieter war burned, one of segregation, humiliation, and silent resistance. Jim Crow laws still ruled the South. Signs reading "whites only" hung above schools, bathrooms, and dreams. For many, the color of their skin decided how far they could go and how high they could never rise. In that divided world, a boy named Jesse Leroy Brown grew up in the small town of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. His home was a wooden shack, his father a sharecropper, his mother a school teacher. They had little, but they had faith. Faith that education could open a door America tried to keep locked. When Jesse looked up at the sky, he didn't see segregation. He saw freedom, endless, untouchable, and fair. And from that day, he told anyone who would listen, "I'm going to be a pilot." It sounded impossible, because at that time, no black man had ever worn the wings of a U.S. Navy aviator. The 1940s were a time of contradiction. America called itself the arsenal of democracy, fighting fascism abroad while enforcing racial apartheid at home. Black soldiers who served in World War II returned to find they were still second-class citizens. The military itself was deeply segregated. Black soldiers could cook, clean, and carry supplies, but not lead, not command, and certainly not fly. The skies, it seemed, were reserved for white men. But in 1941, a small crack appeared in that wall, the creation of the Tuskegee Airmen, the first black pilots in the U.S. Army Air Corps. They proved that courage has no color. Their success in Europe began to chip away at the racist myths that had grounded generations. Still, the Navy, the most elite and conservative branch, refused to integrate its aviation ranks. For Jesse Brown to enter that world meant not just flying. It meant rewriting the rules of who America allowed to dream. Jesse wasn't the loud kind of rebel. He was quiet, precise, and relentless. In high school, he excelled in mathematics and mechanics, fascinated by machines that defied gravity. But every time he mentioned his dream, teachers laughed. One even told him, "You'll never fly, Jesse. They don't let people like you in the cockpit." He didn't argue. He studied harder. He earned a scholarship to Ohio State University, one of the few black students on campus. There he studied engineering and began his long, lonely battle against invisibility. Classmates ignored him. Cafeterias refused to serve him. When he applied for the Navy's aviation training, the recruiter looked at him and said, "You know what you're asking for, son? They'll never let you in," Jesse simply replied. "Then they'll have to tell me that themselves." That quiet defiance would define his life. In 1947, the U.S. Navy, under pressure to modernize, finally opened its aviation program to all races. On paper, equality was declared. In practice, it was a minefield. When Jesse arrived at flight school in Pensacola, Florida, he walked into an environment designed to make him fail. Instructors ignored him. Cadets mocked him. Someone even poured sugar into his fuel tank. He learned to keep his anger buried because one outburst could end everything. So he turned isolation into focus. Every insult became fuel. Every flight, a quiet act of resistance. On October 21, 1948, history was made. Jesse Leroy Brown became the U.S. Navy's first black aviator. No parade, no press release. Just a pair of gold wings pinned to a uniform that few believed he should wear. But Jesse didn't fly for applause. He flew because he wanted to show every boy who looked like him that the sky did not belong to one race. By 1950, the world had changed again. The Cold War had begun, and the Korean peninsula was burning. America sent its best to fight under the United Nations banner, pilots who would face not just the enemy, but freezing weather, poor communication, and impossible odds. Lieutenant Jesse L. Brown was assigned to Fighter Squadron 32 aboard the USS Leyte. There, he met a man who would become his closest friend, Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas J. Hudner, a white pilot from Massachusetts. In the sky, they were equals. On the ship, not everyone agreed. Many officers refused to dine with Jesse, some used slurs openly. But Hudner saw something else. A man whose calm and discipline demanded respect. Together they flew dozens of missions over Korea, striking supply lines and protecting troops trapped in the mountains. And then came December 4th, 1950, the mission that would seal both their names in history. The sky above North Korea was a blinding white sheet of snow and sunlight. The temperature, 40 degrees below freezing. The terrain, a jagged nightmare of ice and mountain ridges. From the deck of the USS Leyte, Fighter Squadron 32 took off on what should have been a routine support mission. 6 F4U Corsair fighter planes roared into the sky, tasked with covering US Marines pinned down near the Chosin Reservoir, surrounded by thousands of Chinese troops. Among those pilots was Lieutenant Jesse L. Brown. He had flown over 100 missions before this one, each time defying gravity and prejudice in equal measure. But that day the air felt heavier. The clouds hung lower. Even his best friend, Thomas Hudner, remembered something different in Jesse's tone when they spoke before takeoff. "Stay safe up there," Hudner said. Jesse smiled. "Always do." The squadron reached the mountains just after 2 p.m. Below them, the battlefield was chaos. Fire lines in the snow, men retreating under relentless gunfire. The pilots descended low, strafing Chinese positions, providing cover for the trapped soldiers. Then, out of nowhere, tracer fire. A burst of anti-aircraft rounds sliced through the sky. One of them tore into Jesse's Corsair. Smoke exploded from the fuselage. The plane jolted violently, losing power. Hudner's voice came through the radio. "Jesse, you're hit. Climb, man, climb!" But Jesse's aircraft was bleeding altitude fast, oil pressure dropping to 0. He tried to control the spin, pulling every lever he could. "I've lost oil pressure," he said calmly. "I'm losing power." Even in that moment, spiraling through the Korean sky, death seconds away, his voice never cracked. "No panic, just focus." He spotted an open valley, a patch of snow surrounded by hills. He had one chance to land. "I'm going down," Jesse said. The others watched helplessly as his Corsair slammed into the mountainside. The impact was brutal, but the plane didn't explode. It crumpled and smoked, stuck deep in a bed of ice. Hudner circled overhead, hoping for movement. Through the shattered canopy, he saw Jesse, alive but trapped. His leg pinned under twisted metal, his head barely visible. The snow around him was turning red. Hudner radioed base, his voice breaking for the first time. "He's alive! He's alive down there! We need a rescue chopper!" But command replied coldly, "Negative, too risky, too deep in enemy territory." Hudner looked again. The smoke from the wreckage rose higher. If the fire reached the fuel tank, Jesse would burn alive. He didn't think. He acted. Thomas Hudner did what no pilot was trained to do. He crashed his own plane beside Jesse's. He lowered the landing gear, cut the throttle, and slammed into the snow a few hundred feet away. The impact nearly killed him, but he crawled out, stumbling toward Jesse's wreckage through waist-deep snow and freezing wind. When he reached the cockpit, the sight froze him harder than the cold. Jesse's leg was crushed beneath the instrument panel. His face was pale, his lips blue, but his eyes were still steady. "You shouldn't have come down here," Jesse whispered. "We'll get you out," Hudner said. "Hang on." Hudner tore at the metal with his bare hands, tried to dig through the snow, but the wreckage wouldn't move. He radioed again for help, his fingers bleeding from the effort. Minutes later, a rescue helicopter arrived, hovering in the storm. But even with tools, they couldn't free Jesse. The metal had fused from the impact. The temperature dropped below -30. Jesse was fading fast. Hudner held his hand, wrapping him in his jacket. "Tell Daisy I love her," Jesse said softly. Hudner leaned closer. "She knows." Those were Jesse L. Brown's last words. A man who had broken America's racial ceiling, now dying in the snow of a foreign land, not as a symbol, but as a soldier. For hours, Hudner refused to leave. He begged the rescue pilot to make one more attempt, but the engines were icing. The sun was setting and enemy forces were closing in. Command ordered Hudner to evacuate. He hesitated, one last look at his friend, frozen but unbroken. Then slowly he saluted as the helicopter lifted off. The wreckage of Jesse's plane became a black scar in the endless white, a monument no one would ever see. The next morning, aerial reconnaissance confirmed what they already knew. Jesse's body was still inside. The Navy considered sending a ground team, but decided the risk was unnecessary. They bombed the site instead, to prevent the enemy from capturing the plane, to erase the evidence. But in that act of destruction, something unintentional happened. The fire didn't bury Jesse's story. It immortalized it. Because on that frozen Korean hillside, two men, one black, one white, had defied not just the enemy, but the very boundaries of their own nation's prejudice. Hudner would later write in his report, "He died with honor. I couldn't save him, but I couldn't leave him either." And from that day on, Thomas Hudner's life would carry a quiet weight, the burden of surviving a man who had taught him what true courage meant. Jesse L. Brown had broken every barrier the Navy built, and in his final act, he taught the world a truth that no bullet could silence, that heroism has no color, and brotherhood has no race. The mountains of North Korea swallowed Jesse L. Brown's wreckage in silence. The next morning, the squadron flew over the valley again, a smoking scar of metal half buried in snow. No movement, no rescue, just emptiness. Hudner's hands still shook as he gripped the controls. He refused to believe it was over. Over radio, he pleaded, "Request permission to attempt another recovery." The answer came flat and final. "Negative. Target has been neutralized." The word target cut deep. Jesse wasn't a target. He was a man, a friend, a pioneer. But in the cold efficiency of war, even heroes became statistics. Back aboard the USS Leyte, the silence was heavy. Pilots who had mocked Jesse now sat wordless in the mess hall. Some avoided Hudner's eyes. Others quietly muttered prayers. When the next sortie launched, Jesse's locker remained untouched. His flight jacket still hanging, his family photograph still taped inside. Hudner spent that night alone on deck, watching the stars that Jesse once called the only color the Navy can't segregate. When the Navy reported the incident, it did so in a single paragraph. Lieutenant J.G. Jesse L. Brown, killed in action during air support operations, Chosin Reservoir. No mention of his historic role, no mention of Hudner's crash, no mention of the sacrifice that transcended race and regulation. In official records, the Navy treated it as routine, an unfortunate loss in a costly war. But privately, officers debated how to handle the story. A black naval aviator dying in the field was history, but a white pilot crashing his own plane to save him, that was controversial. Some feared it would complicate racial relations within the ranks. Others quietly admired it, but said nothing publicly. The early 1950s military was still rigidly divided. Heroism was a privilege unevenly distributed. For Jesse's family in Mississippi, the news arrived by telegram, a line of cold type. "We regret to inform you." There were no cameras, no reporters, no medals delivered at the door. Just the sound of his wife, Daisy, collapsing as she read the words. Thomas Hudner couldn't let it end there. Back home, he requested permission to return to Korea to recover Jesse's body. He wrote letters, made appeals, visited commanding officers. Every time, he heard the same answer. The terrain is too dangerous, the mission is closed. But Hudner didn't want closure. He wanted justice. Not for himself, but for the man who had stood taller than the world allowed him to. In 1951, the U.S. Navy held a ceremony. Hudner received the Medal of Honor for his self-sacrifice. He accepted it, but before the cameras flashed, he asked the reporters to write something else. This medal belongs as much to Jesse as it does to me. The room went quiet. Even in death, Jesse was challenging America's conscience. Yet despite Hudner's words, the story faded quickly from headlines. Newspapers ran small articles, Navy pilot dies heroically, but few mentioned the name Jesse L. Brown. The first black naval aviator, erased almost as soon as he broke the barrier. In the years that followed, Jesse's name became a whisper in aviation history. The Korean War itself was called the Forgotten War, and within that forgotten war lived a forgotten man. History books focused on generals and ceasefires, not on quiet heroes who redefined courage. The Navy moved on. Segregation laws slowly crumbled on paper, but the culture lagged behind. At Ohio State, his old classmates rarely spoke of him. In Mississippi, his childhood home fell into disrepair. And in archives, Jesse's file sat in a box, unvisited, unhonored. But for one man, the silence was unbearable. Thomas Hudner carried Jesse's memory like a scar that never healed. He kept Jesse's photograph on his desk for the rest of his life. Whenever he spoke at Navy events, he told young pilots, "If you ever want to understand brotherhood, remember Jesse L. Brown." Decades passed. The snow that buried Jesse melted long ago, but the story remained frozen, trapped between official reports and personal guilt. It wasn't until years later that journalists, historians, and veterans began to rediscover what had really happened that day. A friendship that defied an empire of prejudice, a loyalty that crossed every boundary. But before the world would remember, it first had to confront how easily it had forgotten. Because sometimes silence isn't an absence of words, it's the presence of shame. Time has a cruel way of burying truth, not under earth, but under indifference. For nearly 2 decades, the name Jesse L. Brown lingered only in memory. His story was passed quietly between veterans, whispered among old pilots who remembered the man who broke the Navy's color line. Then, in the 1970s, historians began digging into forgotten war archives. They found reports that didn't match. A missing recovery mission, an unnamed pilot who had died in a crash, and the Medal of Honor citation that didn't tell the full story. In 1973, a researcher uncovered the complete record. Jesse Leroy Brown, the first African-American U.S. Navy pilot, killed in action on December 4, 1950, during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. That rediscovery sparked something, not just in the Navy, but in the American conscience. Because when the truth returned to light, it revealed more than a forgotten name. It revealed the measure of a man who had quietly changed what the word patriotism meant. In 1972, the Navy named a new destroyer escort ship USS Jesse L. Brown, DE-1089, the first U.S. ship ever to bear the name of an African-American naval officer. When the ship was commissioned, Jesse's widow, Daisy Brown, stood on deck, tears in her eyes, watching the flag rise above his name. For the first time, the Navy publicly acknowledged what had long been ignored, that Jesse L. Brown's courage wasn't just military, it was moral. Thomas Hudner was there that day, standing beside Daisy. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. He simply whispered, "He earned this long before any of us did." The ceremony was small, but the symbolism was vast. It wasn't just a ship, It was a promise that Jesse's story would never again be silenced by the very institution he had fought to belong to. Even after the world began to honor Jesse's name, Thomas Hudner never let go of his unfinished duty to bring his friend home. For over 60 years, he campaigned for a recovery mission to locate Jesse's remains in North Korea. He wrote letters to senators, presidents, and the US Department of Defense. Most dismissed it as impossible. But Hudner was the kind of man who followed through on impossible promises. In 2013, at the age of 88, he made one final attempt. He traveled to North Korea himself, a former US Navy officer standing on enemy soil, to plead with officials to help recover Jesse's body. The mission was ultimately unsuccessful, but it didn't matter. Hudner had done what he always did: show up. He had once crash-landed into a mountain for his brother. Now he crossed political and physical borders for him. When Hudner passed away in 2017, he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, his Medal of Honor beside him, and a photograph of Jesse L. Brown in his pocket. Today, Jesse L. Brown's name is etched in history, not as a victim, but as a symbol of triumph over an unjust system. His story is taught in Navy schools, memorialized in museums, and honored in the 2022 film Devotion, which retold his friendship with Thomas Hudner for a new generation. But beyond medals and movies lies something deeper, a truth that still speaks to the modern world, that courage is not defined by the uniform you wear, but by the dignity you refuse to surrender. Jesse's life was proof that patriotism isn't blind loyalty. It's the courage to love a country that doesn't always love you back, and to serve it anyway, hoping one day it will learn to see you as equal. He flew missions for a nation that denied him entry to restaurants. He risked his life for a flag that once stood for exclusion. And yet, he never lost faith that the sky, at least, was colorless. Hudner's sacrifice showed America what brotherhood could look like when stripped of prejudice. Two men, one white, one black, bound not by race but by respect. Their story wasn't just a chapter in war history, it was a message that the real battle isn't against nations, but against the walls we build within ourselves. The snow that buried Jesse's plane melted long ago. But somewhere in that Korean valley, beneath decades of silence and frost, his story still breathes. A whisper carried by the wind, because heroes aren't always the ones who survive. Sometimes they're the ones who prove that the fight for dignity is worth every risk, even if it ends in the cold. Jesse L. Brown never made it home, but because of him, countless others did, and in the end, he did what he was born to do. He soared.